It's story time. The story begins. Let the words enter your mind. Neurons fire away deep into Imagination Central. There, any adventure can play out. Waves of blooming wildflowers roll in the summer breeze. Butterflies flutter across the field, drifting up into the sky. You build a Persian palace from shadowy memories. Inside, sitting on his ottoman in flowing silk robes, a sultan speaks to his emissary, his eyes drawn thin as he issues a challenge to his people to bring him a riddle he cannot solve. You enter Storyland. Now your heightened focus turns to today's storyteller.
The title of the story is Why Butterflies Don't Fly Straight. It comes from the Tiwa Indians of New Mexico, just a little north of Santa Fe. It's a coyote story. And Coyote is a trickster. Now, Coyote, you need to know three things about Coyote before the story starts. Number one, he is very lazy. And going along with that, number two, he always likes to sleep. He's a very good napper. He's a world-class napper. And the third thing is, Coyote never ran into a trick that he didn't like to pull on people. So he always is pulling practical jokes all the time on everybody and everything that he gets the chance to. So, Coyote and his wife live in an adobe hut on the far end of the meadow. On the opposite end of the meadow is a salt lake, and the shore and the sands are basically salt. One day, Coyote's wife was in the kitchen, and she was baking, or attempting to bake, some bread, and she looked and saw, I have no salt. And so she took the bag that they keep their salt in, and she went into the other room, and of course she found Coyote napping in a chair and said, Coyote, I need salt for the bread. And he woke up and he said, okay. He says, I need you to take the bag and go down to the salt lake through the meadow and come back with some salt for me. Well, if I have to, I think I can do it. Coyote took the bag, walked out of the house, and started down the trail through the middle of the meadow. Well, Coyote got to a rock about halfway, nice big rock, had a small tree with a nice little shade behind it. And he said, you know, I've been walking a while, I'm kind of tired, I'm going to sit down. Take a little break. So Coyote sat down. Took about 3 deep breaths, fell asleep. Behind Coyote, in the meadow, are 1,000 butterflies. And the butterflies are saying to each other, hey, do you remember the time that Coyote played a trick on us? I said, I think it's our turn. He's fallen asleep in our meadow. And they all agreed it would be the greatest thing in the world. All of the butterflies came to Coyote, and each of them grabbed one of the hairs on his coat. And some grabbed the salt bag, and they picked him up, and they flew him back to his house in the window of his bedroom, put him in bed with an empty salt bag next to him. Well, Mrs. Coyote happened to be walking by, and she noticed Coyote's asleep in the bed. Well, this just made her very angry. And she walked into that room and she hollered, "Coyote, Coyote, get out of that bed!" And he woke up, he opened his eyes, and he could not believe that he was in his bedroom. The last time he remembered, he was in the meadow. So he did see Mrs. Coyote being very upset with him, so he grabbed the salt bag, jumped out the window, and saw all the butterflies that are out there just flying in all kinds of different directions, and they're laughing like crazy because they've put one over on Coyote. So Coyote knew that he has this empty salt bag, and he decides, I better get that salt. So he starts back down the road again. Sees the rock and says, not stopping there. That's a problem. So he keeps on walking, and he got all the way to the salt lake on the other side of the meadow. And the sands were full of salt, and he looked at that and he said, well, this is a pretty big bag. You know what? I'm kind of tired. I'm going to sit and rest for a second, and then I'll fill the bag, and then I can bring it home. And he sat down on the shore, and the lake was beautiful, and it was sunshiny and everything, and he heard the lapping of the waves. And you guessed it, in about 3 or 4 breaths, Coyote was asleep again. The butterflies said, what a great day. He said, we can play the same trick on Coyote again. So they all came back down and got a hair on Coyote's coat and grabbed the empty salt bag, flew him back to his house again, placed him very gently in his bed with an empty salt bag next to him. Now Mrs. Coyote was out in the yard, and she was hanging laundry out to be dried, and she saw out of the corner of her eye through the bedroom window the feet of Coyote in the bed. Well, she just exploded. She was so angry. She ran into the house, through the kitchen, grabbed a wooden spoon. That's how angry she was. She grabbed a wooden spoon. That's serious. And she ran into the bedroom, and she was waving that spoon and hollering again, Coyote, Coyote, get out of that bed. And again, he woke up totally disoriented. Said, how am I in my bed? I was down at the lake. This is, oh. Well, he saw the face of Mrs. Coyote, and he said, I'm out of here. Jumped through the window again with the empty salt bag outside, and again he sees the butterflies, and they're just running all over the place in separate angles and everything. Nobody's flying straight, bumping into each other, laughing like crazy. Well, Coyote ran and walked extra fast to get back down to the lake again. And he decided that when he got there this time, he was going to fill that bag with salt. Before he did anything else, he was going to have that bag all filled up and ready to go. And then he got to looking at that bag, and he said, that's a big bag. I don't know if I can carry that all the way home. Maybe if I sat down and rested a minute, I would be able to carry that bag all the way across the meadow and back to the house. So again, he sat down and rested, and he says, you know, I was working really hard. And he put his head down on that full salt bag. And you know what happens next. Coyote fell asleep. Well, the butterflies, they said, you know, we've had enough. This is more fun than a butterfly should have in one day. He said, but let's help Coyote out this time. He said, so they did. They picked up the full salt bag, and they picked Coyote up by the hair of his coat. And they flew him back to the bedroom with a full bag of salt. Put the bag right where his pillow should be, put Coyote in the bed very gently, put his head on the bag of salt, and he was sleeping again. You know what happens. Mrs. Coyote sees the feet, or hears Coyote snoring, or something tips her off that Coyote is still in the bed. And she runs in there and she goes, Coyote, Coyote, you have a full bag of salt for me. And so She removed the bag of salt very carefully, let Coyote sleep, went back out to the kitchen, prepared a large feast for all of Coyote's friends and her friends too. And they all came and had a nice feast together. If you see butterflies flying in a group, or even just one or two, around and going in every direction and going like crazy, you're going to know why they fly that way. And if you're very, very quiet, you'll also be able to hear them laughing about the jokes that they played on Coyote. And that's the story of Coyote and the salt bag and why butterflies don't fly straight. This is the story of the three green ladies. In honor of Earth Day and Earth Month of April. There was a farmer outside of a small village, and he had an excellent farm that he was using for generations upon generations. He was like the third in his family to have this farm. His great-grandfather had it, his grandfather had it, his father had it, and now he has it. So he was moving on towards the end of his life, and he brought his three sons together, and he told them, the land is going to belong to you someday, just as it has belonged to our family for generations. I want you to take excellent care of this land, and especially the three trees on the top of the big hill. Those are the three green ladies. He said, they represent to me the earth and the beauty and the history of the earth. And I can tell you that your grandfather, your great-grandfather, and your great-great-grandfather, every year on Midsummer's Eve, would bring a bouquet of flowers up to the three green ladies, which is what they all called the trees. And they all listened to him, and by, the farmer father died. And he had given the largest portion and the best land to the oldest son. He gave a smaller portion of land to the middle son. And he gave the poorest land and the most rocks and the most difficult to farm to the youngest son, which was the nature of the times because the oldest got the best. The oldest son, on the first Midsummer's Eve, came up, looked at the trees, and said, this land is all mine. He said, I have this land and I can do what I want with it. And he turned around and he walked back down the hill. His second brother, the middle brother, was waiting at the bottom of the hill, and the oldest brother said, what are you doing here? What are you doing on my land? And the second brother said, I came to see what's going on, to see what you're up to. I just wanted to see what you were up to. And he said, off of my land. And he said, this is my land. As a matter of fact, he said, it is my land and I can do what I want with it, and I am going to cut down one of those trees tomorrow. And I am going to make a barn out of that tree. Well, the second brother just shook his head and walked away. So the very next day, absolutely to his word, the oldest son went up with an axe and started chopping that first tree. And he chopped some more from one side and the other. And the tree started to wobble and wobble. And all of a sudden he heard a large scream come out of that tree. It screamed. And then there was a large wind that came by. And the tree twisted and fell directly on the oldest son. And he was killed by the tree. So the rest of the people that worked on the farm came and got the son and took the tree and cut it and made it into a barn. And then the land passed to the second son. And the second son went up the very next Midsummer's Eve and stood on the hill and said, "This land is now mine, and I can do what I want with this land. And I believe I'm going to take that second tree, cut it down, and make a fence out of it." Well, he went down the hill, and lo and behold, the youngest son with the poorest land is at the bottom of the hill. And he said to his older brother, his middle brother, "Did you bring the flowers with you, like Father had told us to?" And he said, "That old superstition?" He said, I'm not buying that at all." He said, "I'll do what I want with this. It is my land." Well, the very next morning he came up with his axe, and he chopped and chopped some more. And the tree started to wobble and wiggle. And again, there was another large scream that came out from the tree. And the wind came up, twisted the tree, and it fell directly on the second son, killing him also. The people who worked on the farm grabbed the tree, grabbed the son's body, went back, and true to the intention, made a fence out of the second tree that had fallen down. By and by, the land was given to the third son. And the third son said, "This is not my land. I am the steward of the land, but it is not my land." He said, "I will bring the flowers, and I will sit under the single green lady that is left, and contemplate the land and contemplate my place in the village and in the world." And as he did, that next Midsummer's Eve, with the potted plants up in the top of the hill, and it was a wonderful scene for him. He was very happy. And he sighed a big sigh of contentment, knowing that everyone in his lineage will be happy with how I am going to take care of this land. He said, "For this tree will last as long as I am here." And that's the story of the three green ladies.